The scorching California sun had turned the trail into a furnace, and when Samuel Quinn saw the woman kneeling in the dirt beside her fallen horse, sharing the last drops from her canteen with the dying animal instead of drinking it herself, he knew he had witnessed something that would change his life forever. Samuel had been riding for 3 days straight from Sacramento, delivering urgent documents to the mining offices in Calico, and the August heat of 1882 was merciless even for a man accustomed to the harsh realities of the Wild West. His chestnut mare, Copper, had been slowing for the past mile, sensing something ahead on the dusty trail that wound through the barren landscape between scattered Joshua trees and sun-bleached rocks. When they crested the small rise, Samuel pulled back on the reins so hard that Copper nearly reared. The woman was perhaps 20 yards ahead, her dark hair falling loose from what had once been a neat bun, her pale blue dress stained with dust and sweat. Beside her lay a magnificent bay horse, its sides heaving with labored breaths, foam gathered at its mouth. The woman was crying, her shoulders shaking as she poured the remaining water from her canteen into her cupped palm and held it to the horse's muzzle. Samuel dismounted in one swift motion, his boots hitting the packed earth with a soft thud. He grabbed both of his canteens, one nearly full and the other half empty, and ran toward the scene. The woman looked up at his approach, her green eyes wide with a mixture of hope and desperation that struck him like a physical blow. "Please," she gasped, her voice hoarse and cracking. "Please help him. He carried me so far. I cannot let him die alone." Samuel dropped to his knees beside the horse, quickly assessing the situation. The animal's breathing was shallow and rapid, its eyes rolling back slightly. Dehydration and heat exhaustion, possibly made worse by some injury or illness. He uncorked his fuller canteen and poured water directly into his own hat, which he had yanked from his head. The woman watched with trembling hands pressed to her mouth. "Hold his head steady," Samuel instructed, his voice calm despite the urgency of the moment. The woman immediately complied, cradling the horse's large head with surprising strength. Samuel brought the hat filled with water to the horse's mouth, letting the cool liquid flow over its tongue and down its throat. The horse initially resisted, too weak to respond properly, but then instinct took over, and it began to drink in desperate gulps. "Not too fast, boy," Samuel murmured, pulling the hat back slightly. "Easy now. There's plenty more." He refilled the hat twice more, giving the horse time between each drink to process the water. Meanwhile, he handed his second canteen to the woman. "Drink," he commanded, noticing her cracked lips and the hollow look around her eyes. "You are no good to this horse if you collapse." She hesitated, her eyes flickering between Samuel, her horse, and the canteen. "But I—" "Drink," Samuel repeated more firmly this time. "I have enough for both of you and the horses. I filled up at a spring not 10 miles back." The woman's eyes filled with tears again, but this time Samuel recognized them as tears of relief. She raised the canteen to her lips with shaking hands and drank deeply, water spilling down her chin and neck. She gasped after several long swallows, lowering the canteen and wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much. I thought we were going to die out here." Samuel continued tending to the horse, pouring more water, and now using his dampened bandana to wipe down the animal's neck and face, trying to cool its overheated body. "What happened? How did you end up out here alone?" The woman took another drink before answering, her voice steadier now. "My name is Natalie Lawrence. I was traveling with a wagon train from San Bernardino to Calico. My uncle owns a mercantile there, and I was coming to help him run it. 3 days ago, we were attacked by bandits. They killed our guide, and 2 other men took most of our supplies and horses. In the chaos, I managed to get on Thunder and ride away. I have been trying to find my way to Calico ever since, but I ran out of water yesterday morning. Thunder kept going as long as he could, but an hour ago he just collapsed." Samuel felt a surge of anger at the thought of bandits preying on wagon trains. a problem that had been growing worse in recent months as more people flocked to California seeking fortune in the silver mines. You did right to run. Those men would have taken you along with everything else. Better to face the desert than men like that. The horse, Thunder, was showing signs of improvement. His breathing had steadied somewhat, and his eyes looked clearer. Samuel knew they were not out of danger yet, but the immediate crisis had passed. He stood up and walked back to Copper, retrieving a length of rope and some dried meat from his saddlebag. He also pulled out a small leather pouch that contained a mixture of salt and minerals that he used to help horses recover from exertion. When he returned to Natalie and Thunder, he mixed some of the powder with water in his hat and coaxed the horse to drink it. This will help replace what he lost through the heat. My father taught me this trick when I was a boy. We ran a ranch outside of Sacramento, and the summers there can be brutal on the horses. Natalie watched him work with obvious admiration. You clearly know what you are doing. Are you a rancher? Samuel shook his head. Not anymore. My father died 2 years ago, and my brother runs the ranch now. I work as a courier and sometimes as a scout for wagon trains. I know these trails between Sacramento and the mining towns better than most. I was headed to Calico myself when I found you. Calico, Natalie repeated, a weak smile crossing her face. That is where I was trying to get. Is it much farther? About 15 miles, Samuel replied. But we are not going to make it today. Not with Thunder in this condition. We need to get him on his feet and walk him slowly to some shade. There is an outcropping of rocks about a mile north of here where we can make camp for the night. Tomorrow, if he's strong enough, we can continue on to Calico at an easy pace. Natalie nodded, accepting his assessment without question. Samuel appreciated that she did not argue or protest. Too many people he had encountered in the wilderness thought they knew better than those with experience, and it usually ended badly. Over the next hour, they worked together to get Thunder back on his feet. It was a slow, careful process that required patience and gentle encouragement. Samuel kept offering water in small amounts, and gradually the horse's strength began to return. Finally, Thunder managed to stand, though his legs were shaky and his head hung low. Good boy, Natalie murmured, stroking his neck with obvious affection. You are so brave, Thunder. Just a little farther, and then you can rest. Samuel mounted Copper and took Thunder's lead rope, walking slowly while Natalie walked beside her horse, one hand resting on his shoulder to steady him. The mile to the rock outcropping felt like 10, but eventually they reached the blessed shade provided by a natural overhang in the sandstone formation. A few scrubby bushes grew nearby, and there were signs that others had camped here before. Samuel helped Natalie settle Thunder in the coolest spot, then unsaddled both horses and rubbed them down. Natalie tried to help, but Samuel could see she was exhausted, barely able to stand. Sit, he told her, pointing to a flat rock. Rest while I set up camp. You've been through enough. She wanted to protest. He could see it in her eyes, but her body would not cooperate. She sank onto the rock with a grateful sigh and watched as Samuel efficiently set up a small camp. He built a fire ring with stones, though he would not light it until evening when the temperature dropped. He spread out his bedroll for Natalie and made a pillow from his saddlebag. He had another blanket he could use for himself. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, Samuel prepared a simple meal from his supplies. He had dried beef, hardtack, and some beans that he could soak and cook. It was not fancy, but it would fill their stomachs and give them strength for the next day. Natalie had been quiet while he worked, but now she spoke up. Samuel, I do not know how I can ever repay you for what you did today. You saved both our lives. Samuel looked up from where he was arranging kindling for the fire. In the golden light of the setting sun, Natalie was beautiful in a way that made his chest tighten. Her dark hair caught the light like silk, and despite the dirt and exhaustion, there was a strength in her face that commanded respect. Out here, we help each other. That is how people survive. You would have done the same for me. I would like to think so, Natalie replied softly. but I'm not sure I would have known what to do. You knew exactly how to help Thunder, how to bring him back from the edge. Where did you learn all that?" As Samuel lit the fire and began cooking the beans in his small pot, he told her about growing up on the ranch, about the lessons his father had taught him about horses and the land. He told her about the summer when he was 15 and a drought had nearly killed their entire herd, how they had fought to save every animal and succeeded through determination and knowledge passed down through generations. Natalie listened intently, asking questions and sharing her own story. She had grown up in Boston, the daughter of a shopkeeper. Her mother had died when she was young, and her father had raised her and her two brothers alone. When her father passed away last year, her older brother had taken over the shop, but there was no room for Natalie in that arrangement. Her brother's wife had made it clear that Natalie was not welcome. Then a letter had arrived from her uncle Frederick in California, inviting her to come west and help him run his mercantile. It had seemed like a perfect opportunity for a fresh start. "I sold everything I owned to buy passage and supplies for the journey," Natalie explained, her voice tinged with sadness. "The bandits took it all. My trunk with my mother's jewelry, the money I had saved, everything. All I have left is Thunder and the clothes on my back." Samuel stirred the beans and added some salt. "Your uncle will be glad to see you no matter what. And Thunder is alive because you stayed with him and shared your water even when you were dying of thirst yourself. That says everything about who you are." Natalie met his eyes across the fire, and something passed between them, a connection that Samuel felt in his bones. "You think I was foolish to waste water on a horse when I might have needed it to survive?" "No," Samuel said firmly. "I think you were loyal and brave. Thunder is more than just a horse to you. He is your companion, maybe the only friend you had left after the attack. You could not abandon him any more than you could cut off your own arm. I understand that. I would have done the same for Copper." They ate their simple meal as darkness fell and the temperature began to drop. The desert night was a stark contrast to the day's heat, and Samuel made sure the fire was strong enough to keep them warm. He gave Natalie his bedroll despite her protests, insisting that he was used to sleeping rough and would be fine with just his blanket. As they sat by the fire, comfortable in each other's presence despite having met only hours before, Samuel found himself thinking about the future in a way he had not in years. Since his father's death and the estrangement from his brother over the running of the ranch, he had been drifting, taking jobs that kept him moving and alone. But something about Natalie made him want to stop running, to put down roots again and build something lasting. He pushed those thoughts aside, telling himself he was being foolish. They had just met under extreme circumstances. The connection he felt was probably just the intensity of the situation, nothing more. But when Natalie smiled at him across the fire and thanked him again for his kindness, Samuel felt his resolve weakening. They talked late into the night, sharing stories and dreams. Natalie told him about her hope to make the mercantile successful and create a real home for herself in Calico. Samuel told her about his father's dream of expanding the ranch to breed the finest horses in California, a dream that had died with him. They talked about the wild beauty of the West, the opportunities and dangers it presented, and the kind of life a person could build if they were brave enough to try. Finally, exhaustion claimed them both. Samuel insisted Natalie take the bedroll near the fire, while he settled himself a few feet away with his blanket and saddle for a pillow. He lay awake for a while, listening to the crackling fire and the soft sounds of the horses resting nearby. Thunder had continued to improve throughout the evening, drinking more water and even eating some of the grass Samuel had gathered for him. The horse would be sore tomorrow, but Samuel was confident he would survive. As Samuel finally drifted off to sleep, his last thought was of green eyes reflecting firelight and a smile that had somehow found its way past all his defenses. The next morning dawned clear and already warm, promising another scorching day. Samuel woke before sunrise and checked on both horses, relieved to find Thunder standing and looking much stronger. He got the fire going again and made coffee from his supplies, the rich aroma filling the camp and waking Natalie. She sat up, her hair tousled and her dress wrinkled, but her eyes were clear, and she moved with more energy than the night before. "Good morning," she said, her voice still husky with sleep. "How is Thunder?" "Much better," Samuel reported, handing her a cup of coffee. "I think we can make it to Calico today if we take it slow. We'll walk the horses for the first few hours, then we can ride if Thunder is up to it." Natalie accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm tin cup. "I cannot wait to reach Calico and send word to my uncle. He must be worried sick. The wagon train was supposed to arrive 4 days ago." They broke camp efficiently, and Samuel noted with approval how Natalie helped despite her ordeal, not waiting to be served or coddled. She checked Thunder herself, running her hands over his legs and body to feel for any injuries or sore spots. When she was satisfied that he was well enough to travel, she helped Samuel load the gear and prepare for departure. The first hours of travel were slow but steady. Samuel led Copper while Natalie walked beside Thunder, both of them careful not to push the recovering horse too hard. As they walked, they continued the easy conversation from the night before, learning more about each other with every passing mile. Samuel found himself fascinated by Natalie's quick mind and sharp observations. She noticed details about the landscape that most people would miss, commenting on the different types of plants and rocks, asking questions about the wildlife and weather patterns. She had clearly educated herself beyond what was typical for women of her time, and Samuel appreciated her curiosity and intelligence. For her part, Natalie seemed equally interested in Samuel. She asked him about his work as a courier, about the dangerous situations he had encountered, and about his knowledge of the wilderness. When he mentioned that he had learned tracking from a Paiute man who had worked on his father's ranch, she wanted to know everything about the native peoples of California, showing none of the prejudice or fear that many settlers displayed. By mid-morning, Thunder was moving well enough that Samuel suggested they could ride if they kept to a walk. Natalie mounted her horse with visible relief, and Samuel swung into Copper's saddle. They continued on at an easy pace, following the trail as it wound through increasingly populated terrain. They began to pass other travelers heading in both directions, miners and merchants and families seeking their fortunes. Each time they encountered others on the trail, Samuel positioned himself between Natalie and the strangers, his hand resting casually near his rifle until he was certain there was no threat. Natalie noticed this protective behavior and felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the sun overhead. Around noon, they stopped to rest the horses and eat some of the remaining food Samuel had brought. They found a spot near a cluster of Joshua trees that provided minimal shade, and Samuel rationed out the water carefully. They would reach Calico by late afternoon if they maintained their current pace, and his canteen still held enough to see them through. "Can I ask you something?" Natalie said, as they sat in the dappled shade, sharing the last of the dried beef. "Of course," Samuel replied, looking at her with those steady brown eyes that made her feel safe and valued. "What will you do after we reach Calico? Will you stay, or do you need to move on to another job?" Samuel was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "I need to deliver my documents and collect my payment. After that, I have no particular plans. I usually take whatever job comes next, go wherever the trail leads. Why do you ask?" Natalie felt her cheeks flush, but she pressed on. "I was wondering if you might consider staying in Calico for a while. My uncle will surely want to thank you properly for saving my life, and I thought perhaps you might find work there. The town is growing rapidly with the silver mines, and I imagine there is always need for someone with your skills." The truth was that Natalie could not bear the thought of Samuel riding away and never seeing him again. In the space of less than 24 hours, this quiet, capable man had become important to her in a way she could not fully explain. She knew it was impulsive and possibly foolish to feel so strongly so quickly, but Natalie had learned from her recent experiences that life was short and opportunities should not be wasted. Samuel looked at her for a long moment, and Natalie saw hope flicker in his eyes before he carefully shuttered his expression. "I could stay for a few days. It would be good to rest Copper before the journey back, and I would like to meet your uncle and make sure you are safely settled." It was not the commitment Natalie had hoped for, but it was something. She smiled at him, trying to hide her disappointment. "That would be wonderful. I know Uncle Frederick will want to compensate you for your help." "I do not want compensation," Samuel said firmly. "I did what any decent person would do." They finished their meal and continued on, and now Natalie could not stop thinking about what would happen when they reached Calico. She tried to imagine Samuel riding away, disappearing back into the vast wilderness, and the thought made her chest ache. She had been alone for so long, even when surrounded by people. Her brother and his wife had made her feel unwelcome in her own home. The wagon train had been full of strangers who viewed her as a burden, a single woman without family to protect her. But with Samuel, she felt seen and valued for who she truly was. As the afternoon wore on, they began to see signs of civilization. Wooden markers appeared along the trail, and the path became more defined, carved into the earth by countless wagon wheels and horse hooves. In the distance, they could see smoke rising from cook fires and the glint of metal roofs reflecting the sun. "Calico," Samuel announced, pointing toward the growing town. "We will be there within the hour." Natalie's heart should have lifted at the sight of her destination, but instead she felt a strange melancholy. The journey was ending, and with it, this precious time alone with Samuel. Once they reached town, reality would intrude. There would be her uncle to meet, explanations to give about the wagon train attack, decisions to make about her future, and Samuel would leave, going back to his solitary life on the trails. Calico, California was a booming mining town, established just a few years earlier when silver was discovered in the nearby hills. The main street was lined with hastily constructed buildings, some little more than canvas tents with wooden frames, others more substantial structures of lumber and stone. There were saloons and gambling halls, a general store, a blacksmith, a hotel, and various other businesses catering to the miners and merchants who flooded the town seeking fortune. As they rode down the main street, people stopped to stare at Natalie and Samuel. A woman arriving in town on a horse, accompanied by a lone cowboy, was apparently worth noting. Natalie sat up straighter in her saddle, refusing to be cowed by the attention. Samuel guided Copper closer to Thunder, a silent show of support. "Where is your uncle's mercantile?" Samuel asked. "He said it was on the main street near the hotel," Natalie replied, scanning the buildings. Then she spotted it, a well-built structure with a painted sign that read Lawrence Mercantile. Relief flooded through her. "There, that is it." They dismounted in front of the store, and Samuel tied both horses to the hitching rail. Natalie's legs were shaky after so many hours of riding, and Samuel steadied her with a hand on her elbow. The simple touch sent warmth through her entire body, and she looked up at him, hoping he felt it too. The door to the mercantile burst open, and a portly man with graying hair and a bushy mustache rushed out. "Natalie, dear God, Natalie, is that you?" "Uncle Frederick," Natalie called, and then she was enveloped in a tight hug. Her uncle was crying, his whole body shaking with relief and emotion. "We received word about the wagon train attack 3 days ago," Frederick said, pulling back to look at her face, his hands gripping her shoulders. "They said there were no survivors except for a few who managed to escape, but no one knew who or where they were. I have been going out of my mind with worry. I sent men to search, but the desert is so vast. How did you survive? How did you make it here?" Natalie turned to Samuel, who had been standing quietly to the side. "This man saved my life. Uncle Frederick, this is Samuel Quinn. He found me in Thunder dying in the desert and gave us water from his own canteen. Without him, we would not have survived." Frederick's eyes widened as he took in Samuel properly, noting the trail dust, the well-worn but quality gear, and the calm competence in his bearing. He rushed forward and grabbed Samuel's hand, shaking it vigorously. "Mr. Quinn, I do not have adequate words to thank you. You have given me back my niece, my only remaining family. Whatever you need, whatever you want, it is yours. Name your price." Samuel shook his head, clearly uncomfortable with the effusive gratitude. "No price, Mr. Lawrence. I was glad to help. Your niece is a remarkable woman who showed incredible courage and loyalty. All I did was share some water." "He did far more than that," Natalie interjected. "He knew how to save Thunder when I did not. He protected me on the trail and brought me safely here. He is the reason I am alive, Uncle." Frederick's eyes filled with tears again, and he clasped Samuel's hand with both of his own. "Then you have my eternal gratitude, young man. Please, you must stay for dinner. I insist. It is the least I can do, and you must allow me to provide supplies for your journey, wherever you are headed next." Samuel glanced at Natalie, who was looking at him with barely concealed hope. "I would be honored to join you for dinner, Mr. Lawrence. Thank you." Frederick beamed and ushered them both into the mercantile, calling for his clerk to take care of the horses. The interior of the store was well stocked and organized, with shelves full of goods ranging from mining equipment to fabric and food supplies. At the back of the store was a staircase that led to Frederick's living quarters above. Over the next hour, Natalie washed and changed into a borrowed dress from her uncle's stock while Frederick and Samuel talked downstairs. When she came back down, her hair freshly brushed and pinned, wearing a simple but clean dark green dress, Samuel felt his breath catch. She was stunning, and the shy smile she gave him when their eyes met made his heart race. Frederick had arranged for a meal to be brought over from the hotel, and they sat at a small table in the living quarters, eating roasted chicken and vegetables while Natalie told her uncle the full story of the attack and her escape. Frederick listened with a grim expression, his hands clenching into fists when she described the violence and chaos. "Those bandits have been terrorizing the trails for months," Frederick said angrily. "The sheriff has been trying to track them down, but they seem to disappear into the desert like ghosts. I am so sorry you had to go through that, Natalie. If I had known the danger, I would never have asked you to come." "You could not have known," Natalie reassured him, "and I am here now safe thanks to Samuel. I want to help you with the mercantile just as we planned. I refuse to let those bandits take away my future." Frederick smiled at her with obvious pride. "You are so much like your mother. She had that same fierce determination." "Very well. We will get you settled and start teaching you the business. This town is growing every day, and there is more work than I can handle alone." As they ate and talked, Samuel watched Natalie interact with her uncle, seeing the genuine affection between them. Frederick was clearly a good man who would take care of Natalie and give her the home and family she desperately wanted. Samuel should have felt relieved, knowing that she would be safe and cared for. Instead, he felt a growing sense of loss, knowing that his time with her was coming to an end. After dinner, Frederick showed Natalie the room he had prepared for her, a small but comfortable space with a real bed, a wardrobe, and a window overlooking the main street. Then he returned to Samuel, his expression serious. "Mr. Quinn, I meant what I said about my gratitude. I would like to offer you a job if you're interested. I need someone I can trust to help with security and deliveries, someone who knows the trails and can handle himself in difficult situations. The pay would be good, and you would have a room here in the building. What do you say?" Samuel was taken aback by the offer. It was exactly the kind of stability he had been avoiding for the past 2 years, the kind of commitment that would require him to stop running and actually build a life somewhere. His first instinct was to refuse politely and make his excuses, but then he thought about Natalie, about the way she looked at him, and about the connection they had formed in such a short time. "Can I think about it?" Samuel asked finally. "It is a generous offer, and I am grateful, but I need to consider it carefully." Frederick nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Of course. Take all the time you need. You are welcome to stay here as my guest for as long as you like. I have a spare room you can use." That night, as Samuel lay in the small but clean room Frederick had provided, he stared at the ceiling and tried to make sense of his feelings. He had been alone for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to want to be near someone, to look forward to hearing their voice and seeing their smile. Natalie had awakened something in him that he thought had died with his father and the loss of his family ranch. But was it fair to her to stay? He had nothing to offer, just a reputation as a drifter and courier. She deserved someone stable and established, someone who could give her the security and home she craved. Samuel knew he was falling in love with her, and that terrified him more than any bandit or wild animal ever had. In the room next to his, Natalie was having similar thoughts. She sat by her window, looking out at the dark street lit by scattered lanterns, and thought about Samuel. She had never believed in love at first sight, had always thought it was something from novels and fairy tales. But what she felt for Samuel was real and powerful and impossible to ignore. She had seen his kindness, his competence, his quiet strength. She had felt safe with him in a way she had never felt with anyone else. But would he stay? Or would he ride away at first light, back to the solitary life he seemed to prefer? Natalie pressed her forehead against the cool glass and prayed that he would give them a chance. The next morning, Samuel woke early and went downstairs to find Frederick already in the store, preparing to open for the day. The older man looked up with a smile. "Good morning, Samuel. There is coffee in the pot, and my clerk should be bringing breakfast shortly. Did you sleep well?" "Well enough," Samuel replied, accepting a cup of coffee. "Mr. Lawrence, I have been thinking about your offer." Frederick set down the ledger he had been reviewing and gave Samuel his full attention. "And? Before I give you an answer, I need to be honest with you about something." Samuel took a deep breath, knowing this might cost him everything but needing to say it anyway. "I have developed feelings for your niece. I know it is sudden and probably seems inappropriate given the circumstances, but I cannot accept your job offer without you knowing the truth. If that changes things, I understand." Frederick studied Samuel for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, to Samuel's surprise, he smiled. "I suspected as much. And I think Natalie feels the same way about you, though she has not said anything directly. The question is, what do you intend to do about these feelings?" Samuel set down his coffee cup, his hands suddenly unsteady. "I want to stay. I want to get to know her properly, to court her if she would allow it. But I do not want to take advantage of the situation or make her feel obligated because I saved her life. And I do not want to accept a job from you just to be near her if that would make things awkward." "Samuel, you strike me as an honorable man," Frederick said slowly, "and I can see that you care about Natalie's well-being, not just your own desires. That matters to me. So here is what I propose. Accept the job on its own merits. It is a legitimate offer based on your skills and experience. If something develops between you and Natalie, so be it. But you will have your own position and income, your own standing in the community. You will not be dependent on her or beholden to me beyond our business arrangement. Does that seem fair?" Relief washed over Samuel like a cool rain. "More than fair. Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. I accept your offer." They shook hands, sealing the agreement, and then Frederick called up the stairs for Natalie to come down for breakfast. When she appeared, her hair neatly pinned and wearing a practical blue dress suitable for working in the store, her eyes immediately found Samuel. He saw hope and uncertainty in her gaze, and he smiled at her in a way that he hoped conveyed his intentions. Over breakfast, Frederick announced Samuel's new position, and Natalie's face lit up with such joy that Samuel felt his chest tighten. "That is wonderful news," she exclaimed. "So you will be staying in Calico?" "For the foreseeable future," Samuel confirmed, his eyes never leaving hers. "Your uncle has convinced me that this town could use someone with my particular skills, and I find that I'm not ready to leave just yet." The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity and growing affection. Samuel quickly proved himself invaluable to the mercantile, using his knowledge of the trails and contacts throughout the region to establish reliable supply routes. He also took on the task of providing security for high-value shipments, escorting wagons loaded with goods through the dangerous terrain between Calico and the larger cities. When he was in town, Samuel spent every possible moment with Natalie. Frederick had no objection to their courtship, often finding excuses to leave them alone in the store or inviting Samuel to join them for family dinners. Samuel and Natalie fell into an easy partnership, working side by side in the mercantile, taking walks through town in the evenings, and talking for hours about everything and nothing. Samuel learned that Natalie had a gift for numbers and organization, and under her management, the store's inventory and accounts became models of efficiency. She also had a way with customers, able to remember their preferences and needs, making them feel valued and heard. The mercantile's business grew steadily under the combined efforts of Frederick, Natalie, and Samuel. Natalie learned that Samuel had a dry sense of humor that often surprised her into laughter, and a deep well of compassion that he tried to hide beneath his stoic exterior. She watched him interact with the people of Calico, always fair and honest, quick to help those in need without expecting anything in return. She saw how children gravitated toward him, and how even the hardened miners respected his quiet authority. One evening, about a month after Samuel had started working at the mercantile, he and Natalie took a walk up into the hills overlooking the town. The sun was setting, painting the desert landscape in shades of gold and purple, and the air was finally cooling after another scorching day. They sat on a flat rock, close enough that their shoulders touched, and looked out over Calico spread below them. Samuel could feel his heart pounding, knowing that he needed to say something but unsure how to begin. "Natalie," he started, then paused, gathering his courage. "That day I found you in the desert, sharing your water with thunder. I thought I was just helping someone in trouble. I never expected that you would change my entire life." Natalie turned to look at him, her green eyes reflecting the sunset. "You changed mine too. You saved me, Samuel. Not just from dying of thirst, but from a life of loneliness and feeling unwanted. With you, I feel like I finally belong somewhere." Samuel reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "I have spent the last 2 years running from my past, from the pain of losing my father and my home. I thought I needed to keep moving to outrun the grief. But when I met you, I realized that what I really needed was something worth staying for, someone worth building a future with." "Samuel, are you saying what I think you are saying?" Natalie's voice was barely a whisper, hope and fear mixed together. He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "I love you, Natalie Lawrence. I think I started loving you the moment I saw you putting your horse's needs before your own, showing a kind of selfless courage that most people only talk about. I want to spend my life with you if you will have me. I know I'm not much, just a former ranch hand turned courier, but I promise I will work every day to give you the life you deserve." Tears spilled down Natalie's cheeks, but she was smiling. "You are everything, Samuel Quinn. You are kind and strong and honorable. You see me for who I really am, not who society says I should be. I love you too with all my heart. Yes, I will have you. Yes to everything." Samuel cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, a sweet, tender kiss that held all the promise of their future together. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were crying and laughing at the same time. They sat on that rock until full darkness fell, and the stars came out making plans and dreaming together. Samuel told her about his hope to someday own a small ranch again, to breed horses like his father had dreamed of. Natalie told him about wanting a real home filled with love and laughter, children someday, and a partnership built on mutual respect and affection. When they finally returned to town, hand in hand, Frederick took one look at their faces and pulled out a bottle of his finest whiskey to celebrate. He gave them his blessing with tears in his eyes, saying that he could not imagine a better man for his niece or a finer addition to their family. 3 months later, on a clear November morning with the desert air finally cooling into autumn, Samuel and Natalie were married in a simple ceremony at the small church that served Calico's growing population. Natalie wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Frederick had special ordered from San Francisco, and Samuel wore a new suit that made him feel awkward and constrained, though Natalie assured him he looked devastatingly handsome. The church was packed with people from the town who had come to know and respect the couple. Samuel's brother had even made the journey from Sacramento with his family, the first time the brothers had spoken since their falling out over the ranch. The reconciliation was tentative but genuine, and Samuel was grateful to have his family present on this important day. Frederick walked Natalie down the aisle, and when he placed her hand in Samuel's, all 3 of them were crying. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel kissed Natalie with a tenderness that made more than a few people in the congregation reach for their handkerchiefs. The reception was held in the street outside the mercantile, with tables laden with food and drink. The townspeople celebrated well into the evening, dancing to music provided by a fiddle player and a man with a guitar. Samuel, who had never been comfortable as the center of attention, found himself enjoying the festivities because Natalie was beside him, her hand in his, her smile brighter than the sun. As the evening wore on and the party began to wind down, Samuel and Natalie slipped away to the small house Frederick had helped them purchase on the edge of town. It was modest but well built, with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a parlor. Behind the house was a small barn and corral where Thunder and Copper were stabled, and beyond that stretched several acres of land that Samuel planned to use for the horse breeding operation he had been planning. That night, in the privacy of their new home, Samuel and Natalie came together as husband and wife with a passion tempered by tenderness. They learned each other's bodies slowly, savoring every touch and kiss, building a physical connection as strong as the emotional one they had already forged. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, talking softly about their hopes and dreams until sleep finally claimed them. The first year of their marriage was filled with hard work and deep contentment. Samuel continued to work for Frederick while slowly building up their horse breeding operation. He started with 2 mares that he purchased from a rancher in San Bernardino, carefully selected for their bloodlines and temperament. He bred them to a magnificent stallion owned by a neighboring rancher, and the resulting foals were everything he had hoped for. Natalie continued to manage much of the mercantile's operations, her skill with numbers and people making her invaluable to the growing business. She and Frederick worked together seamlessly, and the store prospered as Calico continued to expand with the silver boom. In the evenings, Samuel and Natalie would sit on their porch, watching the sun set over the desert, talking about their day and making plans for the future. Sometimes Samuel would play the harmonica that his father had given him, simple melodies that spoke of longing and hope. Natalie would rest her head on his shoulder, her hand in his, perfectly content. Life was not without challenges. The heat of summer was brutal, and water was always scarce. There were concerns about the bandits who still prowled the trails, and Samuel more than once had to defend his supply wagons against attempted robberies. The mining boom brought rough men to Calico, and there were occasional fights and disturbances that threatened the peace of the town. But through it all, Samuel and Natalie faced every difficulty together, their love growing stronger with each shared challenge. They learned to read each other's moods and needs, to offer support when it was needed and space when that was required. They laughed together, worked together, and built a life together that neither of them had thought possible in those desperate moments on the desert trail. In the spring of 1884, Natalie discovered she was pregnant. She told Samuel one evening when he came in from working with the horses, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby," she whispered, her eyes shining with joy and a little fear. Samuel felt his knees go weak, and he pulled Natalie into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "A baby," he repeated, his voice choked with emotion. "We are going to be parents." The pregnancy was not easy. The desert heat was oppressive, and Natalie struggled with nausea and fatigue, especially in the early months. But Samuel was attentive and devoted, taking over more of her duties at the mercantile and making sure she rested as much as possible. Frederick doted on his niece, already imagining himself as a grandfather. On a cool December morning, after a long and difficult labor that left Samuel pacing the floor in terror, Natalie gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Thomas, after Samuel's father. And when Samuel held his son for the first time, he wept with a joy so profound it hurt. Natalie looked up at her husband, exhausted but radiant, and saw in his face all the love and devotion she could have ever wanted. "He is perfect," she whispered. "Just like his mother," Samuel replied, leaning down to kiss her forehead. Baby Thomas was a quiet, observant child who seemed to have inherited his father's calm temperament and his mother's keen intelligence. Samuel was a devoted father, often carrying his son in a sling while he worked with the horses, talking to Thomas in a soft voice about everything he was doing. Natalie would watch them together and feel her heart overflow with love. The horse breeding operation grew steadily. Samuel's reputation for quality animals spread throughout the region, and he began to receive orders from ranchers and wealthy individuals as far away as Los Angeles and San Francisco. The small corral behind their house was expanded, and Samuel hired 2 young men to help with the work. The mercantile continued to thrive as well, becoming one of the most successful businesses in Calico. Frederick, now in his 60s, began to talk about retiring and leaving the store entirely in Natalie and Samuel's capable hands. 2 years after Thomas was born, Natalie gave birth to twin girls. The pregnancy had been a surprise, and the discovery that she was carrying 2 babies had been an even bigger shock. Samuel had worried constantly, but Natalie had remained strong, determined to bring their daughters safely into the world. They named the twins Emma and Grace, and they were identical in appearance but completely different in temperament. Emma was bold and adventurous from the moment she could crawl, while Grace was gentle and thoughtful. Samuel and Natalie had their hands full with 3 young children, but they had never been happier. Their home was always filled with laughter and noise, with the sounds of children playing and horses whinnying in the corral. Neighbors and friends would often stop by, and Natalie became known for her hospitality and generous spirit. Samuel, who had once been so solitary, found himself at the center of a large, loving family, and he treasured every moment. As the children grew, Samuel taught them everything his father had taught him about horses and the land. Thomas showed a natural gift with animals, able to gentle even the most skittish horse with patience and kindness. Emma was fearless, always wanting to ride the wildest colts, while Grace preferred to help her mother in the garden or with the household accounts. Frederick lived to see all 3 of his great nieces and nephew grow into young children before he passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 68. Samuel and Natalie mourned him deeply, grateful for the love and support he had given them. He left the mercantile to them in his will, along with a letter expressing his pride in the life they had built and the family they had created. The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of work and family, of seasons changing and children growing. Calico evolved from a wild mining town into a more established community with schools and churches and proper civic institutions. Samuel served on the town council, using his knowledge and experience to help guide Calico's development. Samuel and Natalie's horse breeding operation became one of the most respected in Southern California. They eventually purchased additional land and built a proper ranch house, though they kept their original small house as a reminder of where they had started. The brand they created, a simple Q intertwined with an L, became a mark of quality that buyers sought out. Through it all, the love between Samuel and Natalie only deepened. They had weathered storms both literal and figurative, had faced losses and celebrated triumphs, had raised children and built a business. But the foundation of everything they had accomplished was the connection they had formed on that blazing desert trail, when a cowboy had shared his water with a woman who was giving her last drops to a dying horse. In 1895, on their 13th wedding anniversary, Samuel and Natalie stood together on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sun set over the land they had built together. Their children were grown now. Thomas was 21 and running the breeding operation with skill and dedication, while the twins at 19 were preparing to open a dress shop in town, combining Emma's business sense with Grace's talent for design. "Do you remember that day in the desert?" Samuel asked, his arm around Natalie's waist, her head resting on his shoulder. "Every detail," Natalie replied. "I remember thinking I was going to die, that Thunder was going to die, and that my dreams of a new life were over, and then you appeared, like an answer to a prayer I had not even had time to say. I remember seeing you share your water with your horse and thinking that anyone who would do that was someone special," Samuel said. "I never imagined that you would become my entire world." Natalie turned in his arms, looking up at his face, older now, but still handsome, still the face she loved more than any other. You saved my life that day, Samuel, but more than that, you gave me a life worth living. You gave me love and family and a home. You gave me everything I ever wanted and things I did not even know I needed. Samuel kissed her softly, a kiss that held 13 years of love and commitment and partnership. We saved each other, he said when they finally pulled apart. That is what love does. It saves us from being alone. They stood together as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Two people who had found each other in the most desperate circumstances and built something beautiful from that chance encounter. Behind them, light spilled from the windows of their home, warm and welcoming. From the corral came the soft nickering of horses settling for the night. In the distance, the town of Calico twinkled with lantern light, a community they had helped build and nurture. Several more years passed in contentment and prosperity. Thomas married a sweet-natured young woman from San Bernardino, and they gave Samuel and Natalie their first grandchildren, two boys born just 14 months apart. The babies were energetic and curious, keeping everyone on their toes and filling the ranch house with new life and laughter. Emma and Grace's dress shop became the most popular in Calico, attracting customers from surrounding towns who came specifically to purchase their beautifully crafted garments. Emma handled the business side with fierce determination, while Grace's designs were both practical and elegant, perfectly suited to the needs of Western women who wanted to be both fashionable and functional. Samuel, now in his mid-40s, had silver threading through his dark hair, and the years of hard work in the sun had carved lines around his eyes and mouth. But he was still strong and capable, still the steady presence that his family and community relied upon. He had expanded the ranch to become one of the largest horse breeding operations in Southern California, and his animals were sought after throughout the West. Natalie, approaching 40, had grown even more beautiful with age. Her dark hair now carried streaks of silver that she refused to hide, saying they were marks of a life well lived. She had taken over complete management of the mercantile after Frederick's death, and under her leadership it had grown to include a mail-order catalog that served customers throughout the region. Together they were pillars of the Calico community, respected for their integrity, generosity, and the obvious love they shared. Young couples would often look to Samuel and Natalie as an example of what a marriage could be, a true partnership built on mutual respect and enduring affection. On a warm evening in June of 1902, Samuel and Natalie celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary with a large gathering at the ranch. All three of their children were there with their families, Thomas's wife now pregnant with their third child, Emma recently married to a lawyer from San Bernardino, and Grace courting a young man who worked as a surveyor for the railroad. Friends and neighbors filled the yard. Tables groaned under the weight of food, and music filled the air. As the sun began to set, Samuel took Natalie's hand and led her away from the crowd to a quiet spot near the corral, where Thunder, now elderly and retired, stood peacefully grazing. 20 years, Samuel said, shaking his head in wonder. It seems like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. Natalie reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the familiar contours she knew so well. It has been a good life, Samuel. Better than anything I dreamed of when I left Boston all those years ago. Thunder looks good for his age, Samuel observed, nodding toward the old horse. You saved his life that day, sharing your water with him. You saved both our lives, Natalie corrected. I think about that day often, about how differently things could have gone. If you had not come along when you did, if you had not had the knowledge to help Thunder, if you had not cared enough to stop, so many things had to align perfectly for us to be standing here today. Samuel pulled her close, holding her against his chest. I believe we were meant to find each other. Call it fate or God's plan or just incredible luck, but I cannot imagine my life without you. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Natalie Quinn. And you are everything to me, Natalie whispered, her arms tight around him. My savior, my husband, my partner, my love, everything. They stood together in the fading light, two people who had built an extraordinary life from a moment of desperate need and unexpected kindness. Behind them, their family and friends celebrated, but Samuel and Natalie were content in their own private moment, remembering where they had started and marveling at how far they had come. As the years continued to pass, Samuel and Natalie grew old together with grace and contentment. They watched their children thrive and their grandchildren grow, eventually welcoming great-grandchildren into the family. The ranch and mercantile continued to prosper, though they gradually handed over more responsibility to the younger generation. Thomas proved to be an even better horseman than his father, taking the breeding operation to new heights and establishing connections with buyers in other states and territories. Emma and Grace's dress shop expanded to include stores in 3 different towns, employing dozens of seamstresses and creating beautiful garments that were worn by women throughout California. Samuel and Natalie spent their later years traveling occasionally, visiting the ranch where Samuel had grown up, and maintaining close relationships with his brother's family. They took a trip to San Francisco to see the ocean, something Natalie had always wanted to do, and they spent long, lazy afternoons on their porch, holding hands and talking about their blessings. In the summer of 1920, Samuel fell ill with pneumonia. Despite the best efforts of the doctor and Natalie's devoted nursing, he did not recover. He died peacefully at home with Natalie beside him, their hands clasped together as they had been for nearly 40 years. Natalie held his hand long after he had drawn his last breath, unwilling to let go of the man who had been her everything. Their children and grandchildren surrounded her, offering comfort, but the loss was profound. Samuel had been her partner, her love, her best friend for the majority of her life. In the days after Samuel's funeral, as Natalie sat alone in their bedroom surrounded by memories, she found a letter he had written to her, tucked into his Bible. With trembling hands, she opened it and read his words. "My dearest Natalie, if you are reading this, then I have gone ahead of you to whatever comes next. I pray that you are surrounded by our family, that you are not alone, and that you remember all the joy we shared rather than focusing only on this sorrow. I want you to know that loving you was the greatest privilege of my life. From that first moment when I saw you sharing your water with Thunder, choosing his life over your own comfort, I knew you were someone extraordinary. Every day I spent with you only confirmed that initial impression. You gave me a home when I was lost. You gave me purpose when I was drifting. You gave me children and grandchildren and a legacy that will continue long after we are both gone. But most of all, you gave me love, pure and true and constant. Do not mourn for too long, my darling. Live fully for both of us. Spend time with our children and grandchildren. Laugh often. Ride Thunder's descendants through the hills we loved. And know that wherever I am watching over you and waiting for the day when we will be together again. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for sharing your life with me. Thank you for being exactly who you are." Yours forever, Samuel. Natalie clutched the letter to her chest and wept. But even through her grief, she felt a sense of peace. She had been blessed beyond measure, loved beyond imagining. Samuel might be gone, but the life they had built together remained, living on in their children and in the community they had helped create. Natalie lived for another 6 years after Samuel's death, remaining active and engaged despite her advancing age. She spent time with her children and was especially close to her grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather and the incredible journey that had brought their family into being. She never remarried, content with the love she had known and unwilling to diminish Samuel's memory by trying to replace him. Instead, she poured her energy into the family business and into charitable work, helping to establish a school and a hospital in Calico. In the spring of 1926, Natalie passed away quietly in her sleep at the age of 71. She was buried beside Samuel on a hill overlooking the ranch, beneath a simple stone that read, "Samuel and Natalie Quinn together forever." At her funeral, Thomas stood before the assembled crowd and told the story of how his parents had met, how his father had found his mother in the desert, sharing her last water with her dying horse. He told how Samuel had saved them both with his canteen, and how that single act of kindness had led to a love story for the ages, a marriage that had produced 3 children, 14 grandchildren, and at the time of Natalie's death, 22 great-grandchildren. "My parents taught us that love is not just a feeling but a choice," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion. "Every day they chose each other. Every day they chose to build something together. Every day they showed us what it means to truly commit to another person. They started with nothing but a canteen of water in the desert, and they built an empire of love that will last for generations." The Quinn family continued to thrive long after Samuel and Natalie were gone. The ranch remained in operation, still breeding some of the finest horses in California. The mercantile evolved with the times, eventually becoming a department store that served Calico and the surrounding communities. Emma and Grace's dress shop legacy lived on through their descendants, some of whom became successful fashion designers in Los Angeles and New York. But more than the businesses and material success, Samuel and Natalie's true legacy was the example they had set of what love could be. Countless Quinn descendants would tell the story of how their family began, of a cowboy who stopped to help a woman dying in the desert, of water shared from a canteen that saved 2 lives and created something beautiful and enduring. In Calico, which eventually declined as the silver ran out but never disappeared completely, there stood a historical marker near the site where the old mercantile had been. It told the story of Samuel and Natalie Quinn, pioneers who had helped build the town and whose love story had become local legend. Young couples would sometimes visit the marker and make wishes for their own relationships, hoping to find even a fraction of what the Quinns had shared. On the ranch, now run by Thomas's grandson and his family, a new tradition had developed. Every wedding anniversary, the couple would ride out to the graves of Samuel and Natalie on the hill, bringing fresh flowers and spending time there together. They would talk about their own marriage, their challenges and triumphs, always inspired by the example of their ancestors who had turned a desperate moment in the desert into a lifetime of love. And sometimes, when the wind blew across the California hills, carrying the scent of sage and dust, it seemed possible to imagine 2 figures on horseback, riding together through the landscape they had loved. Samuel and Natalie Quinn forever journeying side by side through the wild west they had helped tame, their love as eternal and enduring as the land itself.